How you doing, folks? You're watching Live with ONRIE. I'm your host, ONRIE Compen, and today we got the 50th episode of this show. It is airing right now, and I got a great guest for you. This dude has worked across the spectrum in comics. He's done incredible work at both Marvel and DC. He's a frequent collaborator with artist Alex Ross, who literally lives like 15 minutes from me, but he's one of the greatest artists in comics. And this guy, he's one of the best writers in comics, and he's here today to tell us all about his craft and everything. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome JIM KRUEGER. How you doing, sir?
Hey, so good. Thanks.
Excellent, excellent. Why don't you tell us all a little bit of about who you are and what you do?
Well, I live in Burbank, California. I'm a writer. I work in film, TV, and I do a lot of comic books, which I love. My dad got me into it at a really young age, and I think my first comic was some sort of 70s Kirby thing, maybe Commandy. It was definitely Kirby's Captain America run, and I've loved them ever since.
Yeah, for sure, man. Kirby was a legend, and like I run a collectibles business on the side, and I just like I buy stuff sometimes just because I like it, and just because I want to display it. And
right, totally.
The bicentennial Captain America, that is such a well composed cover. I don't know if you've seen it ever.
Oh yeah. In fact, I think I've got a copy here somewhere. It's so great. I mean, the main way that I kind of collect books right now is I make sure I get all the Marvel Masterworks. So, and they're almost at like 300 volumes.
I know, man. It's crazy. It's funny because my introduction to Spider-Man was actually from Marvel Masterworks. I remember when I was 6 years old, my parents, they got it for me as a holiday gift, the Marvel Masterworks collecting the Amazing Spider-Man, like 1 through 10 or something like that, or 1 through 13. And
yeah, I just read. I made it a goal to read like those first 33, all the ones that Ditko drew, and blew my mind on Ditko. Like, I don't think I had ever appreciated his craft to such a degree as when I read those 33 issues.
It's funny you mentioned that because last year I went to the Library of Congress and I got to see all the original art pages from Amazing Fantasy 15.
Oh my gosh.
And you could see all of Stan's editorial notes in there. And you could see the black and white art. And it's not just Spider-Man, the origin of Spider-Man. They had the entire book. And you don't think about the other stories that were in that, but they were actually some pretty
other stories.
Yeah, there were 2 other short stories. One of them was like a sci-fi story, which was pretty crazy. And then the other one was like sort of like I want to say kind of like an existential religious type of thing. It was good stuff for what it was,
Right.
But that book was not known for, superheroes. It was known for doing like off the wall stuff. It was fantasy, and it very much stuck to that. That's cool.
Yeah.
So, let's dive deep into you.
Okay.
JIM KRUEGER. So you're talking about how you got started in the comics. So Jack Kirby was that was your introduction to comics then? And
it was primarily Jack Kirby 70s. It was like my mom and dad probably didn't let me read The Demon because they would have thought that was bad for me. But it was Jack Kirby. I remember buying issue 4 of Eternals, which then became such a big thing for me, and even how I approached writing EARTH-X and kind of the mythology that Jack Kirby created there. It was that 70s Captain America run. It was Black Panther. It was Machine Man. I never really got into Devil Dinosaur, but it was all that Marvel 70s stuff especially. And Commandy, which was like Planet of the Apes times 10.
Oh, for sure. Once they do an adaptation of that, forget about it. It's totally gonna take it. So, okay, a lot of people get into comics as fans. I think that's how we all get in.
Yeah.
But now you got the minority who want to actually work in this business, and I'm sure that for everybody's got their war stories of how they actually broke into the business. Right. So, what was the point that you decided, I don't just love comics, I want to write comics.
Right.
And then you went out and made it happen.
There were a number of people. Well, a number of people said, well, Mark Waid always says, as soon as you find a way in, they close that way, so you can never get in again. And I don't know if I believe that. I really don't know if I believe that. I think that they're just, you need to somehow get in the industry and be seen. So one of the ways that I had heard was that you need to somehow work in the industry, even if you're not writing in the industry. So I did that. My degree was in marketing and journalism, and so I got a job working for Marvel, writing advertising for them, and then got to meet some of the editors, got to help them by writing ads for their books, got to work with them, and bit by bit was able to pitch some ideas. And ironically, the very first job, I started working for Marvel, and a month later, they flew me to Milwaukee, which is so funny because Milwaukee's my hometown, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, for something called Gen Con, where I was supposed to walk around with an artist and make some introductions to retailers and Diamond and stuff like that, because Marvel was promoting this new project called Marvels. So Alex and I met a month, and I was taking Alex's stuff, and as we were walking around, we were talking about our mutual love for Machine Man, and he told me that his mom made him a Machine Man costume when he was younger to go trick-or-treating or something. And so this is getting to the second way into the industry. The first way is to do something in the industry that matters and is important to the industry. The second is to meet someone or to know someone who wants to bring you in. And that was Alex. And it wasn't that EARTH-X was the first thing I had ever written. I had done something that now I kind of cringe at for Valiant. I had done some short stories here and there for Marvel. I had done Foot Soldiers for Dark Horse. And so I was slowly building this name for myself. But Alex was, of course, the big one. And EARTH-X didn't even start as a comic. It started or a big graphic novel. It just started as that little leaflet in Wizard magazine. But because Wizard magazine had asked Alex to come up with, what the Marvel heroes would look like in the future, like he did for Kingdom Come, and because of these articles I was writing for Marvel at the time for their own kind of Wizard-esque magazine that kind of had alternate histories to the characters and was kind of poetic and that kind of stuff. It was called Time Slip. I think Marvel even collected them into a one-shot at one point. But basically, Alex so loved those things that he said, why don't you write an article for each of my sketches, or why don't you write a paragraph for each of my sketches? And then that went to Marvel's president at the time, and he immediately said, okay, let's do this as a project.
That is an amazing story.
Yeah, the second way is knowing someone, and the third is to do it yourself. And so I also did some self-publishing and that kind of thing, and just some, there was a format I came up with where the binding was different. I'm always playing with bindings that still fit into a comic bag. And so it was called the Fly Boys, and Marvel really liked that format. And I did something else that was a superhero team made of 26 superheroes, each with a different letter of the alphabet on their chest, and what they spelled they transformed into. And so I did that as a one shot. So I was learning how to publish on the publishing side, and how do you work with Diamond, and I was marketing Marvel's books, and I was doing stuff with Alex, and all this stuff together helped me find a way in, and the thing is that most people only need one way in. I needed three.
It's interesting that you say that, because I remember I was at a drink and draw in Chicago, which is my hometown, and we're not far from each other. Literally, I just drove through Milwaukee yesterday. And,
oh my God! Well, to visit my parents there, so
awesome, man. Well, the next time you're in town, let me know. We'll have a beer. But
sounds good.
Absolutely. So I was talking with Tim Seeley, and he said, you know, you don't break in the, you're always breaking into comics. You know, you always got to have, you know, and I really took from that too. But I want to go back to something for a minute, because I think what you're doing, your work, particularly with EARTH-X, which honestly I have to admit I haven't checked out yet, but knowing that it's a contained trilogy has really piqued my interest, and knowing that you're basically been given the right to build out an alternate universe and imagine the entire Marvel universe in an older era. Now, I would imagine that there would be two writers that had to play some sort of influence on you, and that would be Kurt Busiek and Mark Waid. Have you consulted them? Have you talked with them? Have they guided you in any way, mentored you?
No, not at all. Not at all. Mark, I know Mark better than I know Kurt. And really, the stuff that always got me excited was like Alan Moore and Grant Morrison, and you know, those guys. Those guys were the guys I wanted to. I was like, because I started in advertising, and Alan Moore's Run and Swamp Thing was coming out, and I began to see how he would have words on a page, and then you'd see the artwork, and the words would work with the artwork with a sense of irony, and there'd be like a third meaning. And for me, that was something that was like a skill that was developed in print advertising. And I was like, oh, I never even thought about applying that way of writing to comic books. It was like, I still remember that spread in the Swamp Thing issue where we find out that Abby Arcane has just found out that her husband is dead, but is being possessed by Anton Arcane, her uncle. And she's like, she's horrified and stuff like that. And she's like, what do you want me to say? And we get this spread of like all these zombies and him saying to her, just say uncle. And it's like, oh, you say uncle when you surrender. You say uncle because he's her uncle. And, you know, I was like, oh, all these meanings. I was like, I know how to do that. And then it began getting me to try to find those ways to do things. Like, I mean, this is a spoiler, but it's one of the spoilers that people really love from EARTH-X. There's a character raised in EARTH-X who becomes the new Red Skull. And he's this punk kid who's controlling everyone with his mind. And he raises his hands and he's like, you eat when I tell you to eat. You drink when I tell you to drink. I am God. And then Captain America with his army teleports using Lockjaw's, using the remains of Lockjaw, which is just that piece. And after the guy says, I am God, then we see Cap appear and he goes, then I'm Nietzsche. And the battle begins.
That's awesome.
You know? And so it's like constantly, how can the language be something that it works with the visuals, that it works with our meaning, that it even encourages like some sort of prior knowledge that people have?
You know, I was talking with a good friend of mine who is writing her own comic right now. And one thing I noticed, we've been kind of like using each other as a sound wall because, you know, I'm starting a new project too, and I'm learning a lot. One of the things I'm taking from you right now during this conversation is what you just said about Alan Moore's third meaning between the panels. And the reason why I'm bringing it in with this artist is because she literally, as I read her script, is looking at each panel. She's got a reference point to every panel of her story with some keyword in there, like, you know, whatever trigger it is. Like if in that panel someone's eating a Snickers bar, she'll call it the Snickers panel, you know, and it's as if every panel is telling its own individual story, and then you find a way to kind of like make it all sequential so that that story, you know, well, and
it's like you're making a puzzle, but you're in charge of building the pieces.
And, you know, collaborating with somebody on the caliber of Alex Ross has got to give you so much experience. When you so when you provide him with scripts, what's the process look like? Is he just basically, you know, when it comes to the adaptation for you, how's that process? Are you interacting with him much, or is that more like editorial at that point?
I've always considered, and it's been different for every major project we've done together. Like EARTH-X, Alex pretty much so just let me go. Like we had those initial sketches, and then I would write this. We had a rough outline, and what was great is we really got away with explaining so many MacGuffins in the Marvel universe, so many things that had never been explained. What's the Watcher watching for? How did the Celestials, which is that reference to Eternals, fit into everything? Originally we're going to have Medusa be the narrator, but then I thought, no, let's have Machine Man, and Alex liked that, and it went back to our first meeting. And so Marvel was going through bankruptcy at that point, so they just weren't paying attention to us, and that's what we're so lucky. So
and now you got it established, so you can keep going with what you're doing.
Really supportive. They're really supportive and nice about it and stuff like that. I mean, EARTH-X was its own thing. But then Alex got more involved in Universe X and Paradise X. Like if EARTH-X, he just kind of let me go wild with his initial ideas for the set of characters. With that one, he's like, okay, I think this character should work with this character, and let's do this. And so that was even more collaborative. And then when we got to Justice, Alex had a pretty clear idea of the basic ideas. And in fact, if you look at issues, I want to say 9 and 10, which is the beginning battle or the battle sequence, Alex pretty much so choreographed all that out.
Interesting.
Beforehand.
Interesting. That's something that, again, what's really resonating with me is this idea of finding that third meaning. And battles in comics typically tend to be kind of like, it can be seen as filler when it's not done right. It's like you got a page of the Hulk throwing a haymaker and, takes up a double splash page,
Yeah.
But when I think you can take it beyond and make it meaningful in the sense that there are multiple things happening here. Well, Hulk is punching, whoever it is, and it goes beyond that. Now with a project like EARTH-X, which I'm assuming is not through the same type of pipeline that, say, Amazing Spider-Man is, you have a little bit more leeway with taking your time on the project, or are you on this strict deadline like every other mainstream book?
Oh, it's always a strict deadline. It's always a deadline. Because it's kind of like when we pitched the project, or when Alex set up the project, it was kind of like, okay, let's get it going, let's get it in. And I mean, fortunately, EARTH-X was in the top 10 every issue that came out of it. Like, it just, I mean, not everyone likes Universe X or Paradise X, but EARTH-X is like the Star Wars of the bunch, So it's kind of like, that's the one, it established the world. And then with later issues, we got to build out, we got to expand, we got to the point where we were like, okay, let's try to offer an explanation to every single concept in the Marvel universe.
I guess the reason why I'm asking this is because I always wonder too, and I think you probably have a very good understanding of this, given the broad spectrum of how you worked in this industry. But I notice personally that when it comes to my own independent comics, I'm bootstrapping a lot of this stuff, right? I'm paying for the production, I'm paying for the printing, and I'm out there selling the books and doing all that stuff. So when I want to take my time with the projects that I invest in. But when you're working for a much bigger company, you still want to take the time to make sure that the quality is there, but at the same time you have to deliver. So I wonder, is there some sort of fine balance with this and from your experience?
Yeah, and you know what? I didn't know this as a writer early on, and I definitely made some mistakes with people, and I feel like when I look back at that, the most important thing I wish someone had sat me down on and said was like, look, even your script is going to be to a degree collaborative, and you have to be open to the editors. You have to be open to the publishers. You have to be open to the fact that you may want to do things and you're not going to be allowed to do them, but listen and converse and talk, and maybe you'll get to do it in a better way than you ever thought. Like another example from EARTH-X, and I'm sure we're going to be talking about justice here for sure.
Absolutely. You bet we will.
And another example from EARTH-X was there was a point in which Reed Richards, because Professor X is dead, Reed Richards gets the Cerebro helmet, and he's going to put it on so that he can locate all the mutants on the planet, because there's this giant curse that's given everyone on Earth superpowers, and has caused so much chaos and restructuring and stuff like that. So he puts on the helmet to see all the mutants, and ultimately, I mean, this is a big spoiler, but ultimately it's not mutants that are all over the Earth. It's Inhumans. It's the Terrigen Mists were released, and this is the big explanation for that. Well, Marvel contacts me and they say, you know what, Cerebro wouldn't work for Reed Richards. It was only built for Professor X's brain. And so so the editor says, you can't do that. And then I was like, but this is Reed Richards. So I rewrote it slightly to have a schematic, that Reed had a schematic of Professor X's brain. And so he literally, again, to that third meaning, stretched his mind, stretched his brain to be able to make it look internally like Professor X's. So then Cerebro would work.
Oh, that is so badass. And
the story worked. And that's one of those other scenes from that book that people really respond to as a favorite moment. And the key is that it's because an editor was awesome and they said no. And I think real creativity happens, real like problem solving in the midst of stories happens when we're told no. So sometimes the worst thing that can happen on an indie book is that the right people aren't helping us put it together and make it happen. The right people aren't telling us no, which is why, and we can talk about the notes process and what's a good note and what's a bad note too, if you want.
No, I would love to. Jim, I think everything you're saying is really hitting home for me, because honestly, that's why I brought on an editor who became my co-writer, David Anthony Kraft.
Oh, so awesome.
He taught me everything I know about comics. I learned everything from him, and the one thing I like is it's not about saying no, something can't work because of this, but it's also what you were saying. It's brainstorming. When you come across that roadblock, how can you be creative to work your way around the problem and make it work? Because let's say you didn't address that issue. Let's say you stuck to your guns and you said, you know what, it's fucking Reed Richards. Who gives a shit? You wouldn't have been able to really explain it. And think about what would happen if you were in a panel and all of your fans would have been pissed off because you would have totally like undermined Professor X, who's a pivotal character in the Marvel universe. And I could talk with you about EARTH-X all day, man. I mean, this shit's fucking cool, and I will remedy the fact that I haven't read it yet, and I will definitely pick it up now. It's
and what's
right up my alley.
What's coming out right now is Marvel's X, which is the prequel to it.
Excellent! It's
telling the chaos of when the pandemic of everyone turning into mutants comes out. There's no explanation of are they mutants or Inhumans. It's just like something is affecting the populace. And I wrote it before our current pandemic, but it's amazing how many things, including like how dangerous it is just to go to a grocery store, show up in that.
That's fascinating. And
and by the way, let me interrupt.
Go ahead.
David Anthony Kraft is one of my favorites. I'm such a fan of his, and his run on Defenders is my favorite run of Defenders ever. And I mean, when I mentioned before the early Kirby stuff, all that 70s Kirby thing, the other thing that freaked me out and affected me forevermore was his, and I know the first issue was by Gary Conway, but his run on Logan's Run.
Oh yes, he
Some of
remembers that very
one of my
fondly.
favorite comics ever.
That's awesome.
And when people say, "What's your favorite version of Logan's Run?" I'm David Anthony Kraft's comic.
That's awesome. And he's probably going to watch this. I'm definitely going to make sure he watches this episode now, and I'm sure he'll be very flattered by that. But
I listen to all my answers, and he's like, he doesn't know anything.
Well, the Defenders run that I read that got me to want to hire him was the Scorpio Saga with Keith Giffin's work on there. And the thing that really, the one thing I always respected about Dak and what I've learned most from him is that he never talks down to his audience. He's always talking at the level of anybody who is willing to dive into his work. And it doesn't matter if you're 5 years old or 25 years old. It doesn't matter. Like, he's extremely detail oriented. And just having had all these experiences working, across the spectrum, just like he's learned a lot. And, it's been a tremendous privilege to be able to have someone like that as a mentor. And the way I like to look at it too is I had another guest here last week, and I made this metaphor that making comics is kind of like forming Voltron. And when you were saying before about how you were like, oh man, I wish I would have listened to editors, it's like I think a great comic is a result of every piece of the collaboration coming together in synchronicity, in perfect synchronicity. And you very eloquently put that in, illustrated that with your story from EARTH-X. So, that's really a lot of what you're saying is really resonating with me now.
Cool.
Yeah. And now I kind of want to get over to Justice. So
yeah,
I want to know how that all came to be, because here you are working at Marvel, and now you're just kind of like, all right, I'm going to go to the competition. Me and Alex, we're going to.
We finished Paradise-X, and one of the things that was discovered is Marvel was really, because whatever new president was in, was really trying to push the Ultimate Comics line, which was awesome. But he was really upset. He was really upset that Universe X and Paradise-X, those trade paperbacks, were selling better than the, through like Barnes
and Ultimate X. Yeah.
Than the Ultimate Spider-Man and X-Men and stuff. So he was so upset about that. So he was very antagonistic towards us, and Joe Quesada was defending us, and it was just this weird thing where we felt we kind of needed some space from Marvel for a while because of just, this president who was not supportive, despite editorial really standing for us. And so that was part of it. And plus, like I'm sure so many people right now with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, this is their first introduction to these characters. So for the Marvel characters. So for a lot of us, Super Friends was the introduction to these characters. Like, I knew Superman and I knew Batman, but getting to see the animated, Aquaman and Wonder Woman, all these different characters, in Super Friends, the cartoon, was amazing.
Yeah. No, and it seems also, I want to speak to that for what was going on with you at Marvel for a minute, because
I should say that so when Alex and I first sat down to do Justice, we were like, okay, let's do a really serious Super Friends, and let's do it in a way in which, like, we always have little things in the background, little like, ooh, what's this other little idea we're gonna work in here? What's this other thing we're going to work in here? What could we possibly do with this? Like, just little things. In some ways, there were things that had happened in DC continuity that we wanted to write, that we were upset about, like the death of Aquaman's son. And so it's like we kind of had that, and we were like, let's do the classic heroes. So it was like at a point in DC continuity before, like, Hal Jordan had come back, before Barry Allen had come back, And I'm like, from Mark Waid's run and Mike Barron's run and Mesner Loeb's run, I just love what they did with Wally West. So Wally West was like my Flash for sure. But it was like, let's do the Marvel universe, or let's do the DC universe the way it's known throughout the world, the way it's known through branding and, kids' underwear and wall posters. It's always Barry Allen as the Flash. It's always Hal Jordan as Green Lantern, or Hal Stewart is Green Lantern as well, which is why we brought those things in. And so that was really the goal on Alex's side with that. And then with mine, I wanted to make a statement of community because it was Legion of Doom versus Justice League. And the way I approached it was that there's no way villains can stand together forever. Like ultimately their inherent selfishness will break them down. So it was figuring out ways to have them even aligned in the first place. And then with the heroes knocked down and them being rebuilt, it was like this ever expanding community of those dedicated to good. So
it's essentially like you wrote the Infinity War, and you basically did Infinity War and Endgame in a 12-issue comic 10 years before those movies, 15 years before those movies even came out.
Yeah.
And with the DC universe. And folks, if you haven't seen it yet, or if you haven't read it yet, be sure to check out Justice. It is an incredible 12-issue arc written by Jim, illustrated by Alex Ross. It is beautiful. I love it. In fact, this episode makes me want to go back and reread it right now. It is just some beautiful work. Now, but I want to speak to you about something real quick, and you kind of answered the question already. So, when you find yourself in these situations, and I think a lot of us professionals do, where we're in unfavorable situations where something that's working really well for us may not be seen in something we're really attached to, something that we're really focused on may not be seen in a favorable light. And then you have other people within the industry who have their own intentions and their own strategies, and that can interfere with your work. And that can get kind of, upsetting at times. But it sounds to me like you've got enough going on through various projects and everything that you can kind of divert your attention and not get so hung up on stuff. But how do you manage that sort of disappointment or letdown or, whatever kind of feelings of stress that you might be accumulating, as you're going through these kinds of processes?
Well, I think part of the answer to that is expectation. Like, I expect that things aren't always going to work out. I expect that projects that I give myself all to are going to receive poorly, or maybe there's something wrong with me that doesn't allow them to be as good as they could have been, or maybe someone else becomes president who has a different agenda, and part of his agenda was that he felt like continuity was making Marvel inaccessible. So he wanted, to build the universe or the Ultimate line to make Marvel more accessible. And that worked great at the beginning. Like, I totally understand it. I mean, the Ultimate Universe line then became this other thing that was totally inaccessible at times. But that's okay too. I mean, it was still fun for those who gave themselves to that continuity and gave themselves to the rules that were set up in that continuity. It was still great. It was still lots of fun. It just, and
I think the thing about the Ultimate Universe is that it set up a lot of, it brought Marvel into them. I think it allowed for a lot of the things that transpired in the MCU to happen. And we also saw some characters come out of it. But I remember Jeff Loeb was critiquing it at one point. I was reading about it in Wizard articles. This is a long time ago, right when the Ultimate Universe was at its peak, and he basically shot this question: what are you guys gonna do when you reach a point when this stuff is as old as the regular recurring stuff? At some point, this stuff is going to have to merge, and That's exactly what happened. It eventually merged, and I think it was the right decision to be made. But what I really like about what you've done with EARTH-X, conceptually, is that it really does have the ability to stand on its own two legs. And I always thought about whether or not, if I ever worked at Marvel, do I want to be the guy who's writing Spider-Man every month, or do I want to be the guy that takes on the kind of bold projects that you and Alex take on? And I think that I'm really excited about that idea, because you can focus on the things that really matter to you, and bring in your true love of comics and all the research I'm sure that went into both EARTH-X and Justice. I'm sure you guys had to go back and read a ton of shit.
Yeah, it was, I mean, all the EARTH-X stuff, it was like I had grown up in continuity, and we approached EARTH-X and we approached Justice in the same way. We looked at what were the characters like when they were first introduced in EARTH-X, and just using this idea of, someone like one of my former managers called it the tyranny of story. It's like, if you look at what a character was at the beginning, at their origin, tyranny of story says that there's going to be a sense of irony, there's going to be a sense of something terrible, and something that has to work through to bring that character to some sort of ultimate full circle closure. That's why, like, I'm a giant Jason Aaron fan. That's who I
yes. Oh, he does some great work,
and especially the really serious stuff. But I don't really read comedy comics. But when I think about like Wolverine and the X-Men, as far as Wolverine being Professor X, I'm kind of like, oh, that's the end of Wolverine's story. That's how his story should end. He was the one who comes in who couldn't even be taught, who ultimately becomes the teacher. And so like with Spider-Man, that's why in Universe X I had Spider-Man become a cop, because of that fateful moment where he gets a chance to stop the burglar that would later kill his Uncle Ben, and the policeman following the burglar says, you could have done it, you could have stopped him, why didn't you do it? And Spider-Man looks at him and says, oh, that's your job. And so the tyranny says that, the tyranny of story that I always kind of work through my mind says that, oh, then Spider-Man must become a cop at one point. And so it was like that, and approaching the characters in that way and saying, what's irony? What's, what are these pieces where it's like, oh, of course he would become a cop.
Of course he would, because how else is he going to make money? When you think about all the things that keeps happening, at what point
Spider-Man has been a cop ever since that moment. Clearly he's been his own version of a lawmaker and a law protector. So,
Well, here's a question for you. It's given that you've written Spider-Man as a cop, does he still hold true to his form of his belief of, with great power comes great responsibility, or has the system?
Oh, yeah, totally. In fact, I should say that this is another, especially for everyone who's watching that's into writing. I had like I have all these revelatory moments in my life where I'm like, oh, how could I have ever written something without knowing this? How could I have ever written something without knowing this? So when I first got to Hollywood, because of a big help, because of a big favor, I got to have lunch with Sam Raimi. I know, of Evil Dead, of Spider-Man, of all this stuff. And he'd already read a bunch of my comics, and we were sitting in the commissary and at some studio, and we were talking about stuff, and he was talking about how he was talking about the similarities between movies and films and comic books and TV, if I didn't say TV already, and the idea of something that moves along in chapters, or something that moves along in 2-hour pieces at a time, or 20 pages at a time in a comic book. And he said stuff that affected me forever, and it certainly was in the writing of EARTH-X. It certainly was in the actually, this was even before EARTH-X, but so I kind of want to say that I knew it, but I had never heard it so poignantly or so perfectly that it became a rule, and it certainly applied to justice. And he said there are two things you always need to do with each advancing chapter. And he's like, first of all, you need to advance the chapter. If it's something people have seen before, or if it's too similar to another story, people are going to lose interest. But then the second thing that's so important, and I so agree, is he said every new chapter, every new piece has to remind people why they love that character in the first place. Which is why when what was the Marvel thing where Captain America's an agent of Hydra, Secret Empire, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I do really liked Secret Empire.
I liked it too.
I liked where it went, but the idea of spending 2 years with Evil Cap before we get to Secret Empire means that those people coming to Captain America, yes, it was advancing it, but we weren't getting those things about Captain America that we love.
You know, I remember how controversial that relaunch of Captain America was. I remember seeing a video of someone actually burning that issue because it defeated the purpose of Captain America. Like, it stood against everything that Captain America stood for.
Right.
But you see, here's the thing, and Dak and I talked about this, and we really liked that first issue. And then, and then we kind of just slowly made our way through the rest of it. But the thing is that Captain America is the good guy and that he's going to be the good guy again eventually. But if you don't allow yourself to be immersed in the story and allow for things to be what they are until you progress through the story, you're never going to know what works and what doesn't. And that's kind of the thing that I think it lends itself to other creators taking chances and not being able to do it so easily when you're working within, the mainstream comics. Rick Remender, the guy who wrote, a lot of Secret Empire, he basically decided after that point that he's done working for Marvel and has been working for Image ever since, because now he can do exactly what the hell he wants without having a ton of people, shit on him every time he does something with those characters. That's. And that's
that said, it's important for every writer to be told no. Like, I wish Rick was still doing stuff for Marvel as well as his independent stuff.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you on that. I think editorial, they're the ones who are basically, they're steering the ship, and their names are not on everything, are at the top. They're usually at the bottom. But they play such a key role in everything that goes on because they're overseeing it. They're technically, their job is to watch your back as a writer and protect the properties.
Yeah, and in every experience I've had with editorial, my projects have gotten better. So I just, like, in a case like when Secret Empire was going on and the 19 or 20 issues before it of Captain America were going on, I kind of just wish there had also been like some classic Captain America comics coming out at the time,
just to kind of balance it out.
Yeah, like every time during that era, which during that era where you had, again, to the Jason Aaron's credit, the female Thor, but then you also had this character and this character and this character, and it felt like 6 or 7 different classic characters in the Marvel universe were all becoming different people. And because it happened all at that time, I was like, whoa, I don't care about these people. And I'd be more willing to care about them if I could still get a Bruce Banner Hulk book, or I could still get this book. And so that's my soapbox for.
No, that's I love to hear your perspective. So going back to Jason Aaron, what of his work are you drawn to more? Is it his Marvel work, or do you like his Image work more?
I kind of like, I like his really serious work more than the funny stuff. More than the funny stuff. And like I love Scalps. You know,
Scalped was phenomenal.
it was
such a good.
it was a little hard on me. I'm like, you know, like I think I'm probably a little bit of a prude, but I loved it. Like, it was amazing. I think his run on Ghost Rider is my favorite run of Ghost Rider ever. Like, his run on Ghost Rider is. Have you read it?
I have not. I was
Okay,
just
so here's a spoiler. Here's a spoiler. This is why it's so amazing, and this is like midpoint of the story, so it's not that much of a spoiler. Basically, Johnny Cage, his family's all dead. You know, his wife and his children. He's lost them all. He's discovered that there's this angel in heaven who's the real. It wasn't Mephisto. He sold his soul to Mephisto, yes, but the power he has comes from this angel in heaven who is trying to do a new rebellion against God and the realms and blah 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 blah. He's learned from the mistakes the devil made, and this time it's another angel trying to take over heaven, and that's the angel that's given him his power. So Johnny Blaze gets beaten down and broken down, and there's like this warrior nun who comes to his help, and like Johnny Blaze is like, it's all going to hell, it's all over, blah blah blah. And she looks at him and says, and they want him to help fight in heaven with his bike. Like, they want him to go to heaven and fight and keep this rebellion from rising in heaven. And he's like, no, I'm done. And she says to him, where are your wife and children? Instantly, he realizes, oh, they're in heaven. This is a chance to redeem my past failure of not protecting them. And he gets up and the fight moves on and stuff like that. It was so inspirational and such a big idea that I was like, oh my gosh. Like, I've read.
How many issues was he able to do?
They did an omnibus of it. That wasn't one of the biggest omnibuses, but I would say you're talking about maybe 3 trade paperbacks.
It's not bad at all.
Of like 6 issues each or something like that.
That's excellent. I mean, that's a good evenly paced series.
I love that. I loved his run on Thor, especially that first volume or the first 25 issues. Especially that, but all of it was great. All of it was worth reading. I liked the Goddamned a lot. I thought that was really
dude, my man, I fucking love the Goddamned. There's a new one that started. And I read the first issue of it.
I know. I just read the.
Awesome. It's great.
Awesome.
RM Gura, who he did Scalped with. Those two, they do. But yeah, I love the Goddamn. That first arc was awesome. That was some brutal shit, and that totally inspired me too. I read like the first 2 arcs of Southern Bastards, and then I really liked that too. That was some good stuff when you got to learn about.
I was just so upset that what's his name died. At the end of the.
Oh yeah. That was really upsetting.
I was so upset, and the rest of the series. And I read it to the end, but the rest of the series was never as great as that first arc.
Really?
I so great. Oh my gosh, I couldn't.
Yeah, I really love that first guy. I pulled
and it was such an emotional response. That's why the rest of the series never lived up. It was still as well written and well drawn as ever, but it was like Vindicator Guardian dying in Alpha Flight number 12. It's like, no matter what great things Byrne did after that, it was like, oh no.
Yeah, you killed your main character.
Yeah. like it wasn't just, and he was trying for, like, Byrne went for the emotional thing, but I didn't care about an Alpha Flight without him as much as I did with him, so.
It's interesting. A couple things I want to say. The first thing is I love how enthusiastic you are about comics. And even after all these years, even after doing all this stuff, you're still out there reading everything that everybody's putting out. You're looking for stuff to enjoy. This is how you come off to me. You come off to me as somebody who is as much of a creator as he is a fan, and someone who just loves what he does for a living.
Yeah, no, totally. I love writing comics, but I mean, everyone jokes about writers that they don't like to write, they like to have written. That's true for me too. I mean, it's especially during the pandemic, you would think that there'd be all this extra time to write. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of heartache right now too. There's a lot of kind of this sense of overall just dread that people carry with them, and I'm always listening and paying attention to the zeitgeist, so that affects writing too.
Absolutely, it does. And I think what we're gonna come out of this with is definitely going to have a tremendous impact on our work, because I feel like I finally broke free of the zeitgeist. I've been looking for opportunities and have taken them throughout the year where I'll just go on drives with my family, and we'll go to secluded areas and go on hikes and stuff and just get away from the phones and the news. And I think it really gives a lot of perspective, and I think it's important right now for us as creators to be absorbing content consistently and taking what we can from it in order to inspire us and keep moving forward. And that brings me to the second thing that I wanted to tell you about. So I read this book by Brian K. Vaughan, who is obviously, one of the most celebrated comic book
so amazing
creators. Yeah. And I read this short 6-issue story he did called We Stand on Guard. And I literally tore through all 6 issues of this book in, I don't know, like 2 or 3 sittings. It was just, as soon as I read one, I had to pick up the next. But after I was done with it, I was a little disappointed in what I read, because kind of like what you were saying, how, you're a little faint of heart when it comes to stuff being too dark and too over the top. And that's kind of how I felt about this. But, I took things from it. I saw that there were characters there, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to try and take what this story set up here and didn't play it off in my story now, and
totally
work
great.
Off of that,
Yeah, totally great.
And here's one, last big question that I want to ask you. When it comes to plotting or, actually like seeing the scope of your story, do you ever find yourself referencing other stories that have been done and saying, well, this is kind of like this, but it's my take on it, and so it's going to have much more twists? Or do you just kind of make shit up as you go and say, are you more character driven, or do you kind of see the whole story and do you base that story off of something else that has an effect on you?
It's kind of different with each project. I mean, I really pay attention, especially with characters who are previously established. I'm always like, what are the rules of this character? Like, what are the things I can't do with this character that's because people would reject that. Like if you read a story about Spider-Man or Captain America or Superman, and it doesn't feel like the real Superman or the real Spider-Man, you reject it. It doesn't count as like a real story. And the only way to make it real is to follow the rules. And then I look at those rules and I say, okay, if this limitation is in place, how do I work around that? How do I work around that rule? Because by working around the rule, I'm lifting up the rule as a character piece that's so important.
That's fascinating.
So, like, for example, here's a story I've never gotten to tell, and I just feel like, but I did in a caption box in the introduction to issue 12 of Justice, I did speak to it, is I want the story where young Superman, first hail of bullets, the bullets hit him, bounce off, and hit somebody else. It's like, an innocent bystander. And so all of a sudden Superman has to go through the mythos of, it's not enough to be bulletproof. The people around me have to be bulletproof. And I'm the only way to make that possible. So a bullet ricocheting off him, he has to know where it goes.
And just simply that experience of, learning and the price of learning.
Yeah. There's a cost to everything. And it's important to weigh in that cost, because that's the emotions. Like Superman, like people, those who don't like Superman, they always don't like him because he's too powerful. And I would argue that here's a guy who hears all our cries for help, and he can only answer so many. That makes him so vulnerable to listening to the cries that he can't save. Like, they have to wear on him and beat him down, and yet he still smiles when he rescues. He still gives a wink when he rescues, and yet he hears people dying all the time.
And that's got to be, when you think about it, the biggest vulnerability that Superman has is his own depression, which has been tackled a couple times. I think J. Michael Straczynski really focused on that.
Why he's got to go to the Fortress of Solitude. He's just got to go someplace where he doesn't hear everything. But then he probably feels guilt too, even there, because there are cries that he doesn't hear and cries that he could have saved, cries for help, that kind of thing.
Yeah. To be honest with you, I always find Superman to be more fascinating and interesting to write than Batman, even though I haven't written either characters. But when it comes to Batman, there's this consensus that like he can do no wrong. He's the ultimate superhero, and like, if my sister heard me saying this, she'd probably punch me in the arm right now because she's such a big Batman fan. But I agree with you. I think a lot of people undermine Superman as a character and kind of see him as just being this indestructible guy. But that's also his weakness, as you're pointing out, is that what are the lessons that you learn from it? And
that's that whole idea of rules or characteristics and what's behind it. And, we don't break the rules as much as we need to lift them up, because those things are the things that people even come to the book for in the first place, or come to the character for in the first place.
It seems to me like the way you go about it at times is that you're asking yourself questions about these characters. Yeah. And in doing that, that's how the story kind of like formulates around.
Totally. The story comes out of the questions.
I think that's fascinating. I think that's awesome. Jim, we're coming to the end of our episode here, and I want to give you a chance to tell us where to find you and how we can best support you. But before we do that, I just want to tell you, this has been one of the most captivating conversations for me as a writer. And there's just so much I took from our conversation just now that I have no doubt will help me as I progress forward with my next project. And I want to thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it. I know how busy you are.
Oh, that's really nice of you. I appreciate you being so kind and letting me do this.
Oh, man, no problem. Well, go ahead. Tell us all where we can find you and support you.
Well, my Instagram is probably the best way to find me, and that's just I'm Jim Krueger, like the letter I, the letter M, and then Jim Krueger. As far as books, I have lots of things coming out. One of the things I'm really, we've already talked about Marvel's X, which has 2 more issues that come up before the end of the year. And that's exciting. It really sets, it's really the bridge from almost the Kurt Busiek, Alex Ross Marvel's world of characters and their original costumes and everything to the EARTH-X reality of where everyone has superpowers or everyone has been mutated. If you can find them, because they're already kind of sold out everywhere, there's a book called No Ones, which is about a team of celebrity heroes who get cursed to insignificance. So no matter what they do will be forgotten. And that was really fun. And the artist on that, this guy called Welby, he was so great that then we brought him on Marvel's X to be the artist on that. So that's kind of the secret origin of Welby. If you can find him on Amazon, I have 2 other graphic novels that are really obscure that I think people will really love, because I'm so proud of them, that I did with the artist Zach Brunner. One's called The High Cost of Happily Ever After, which is a dark fairy tale in which, the prince gets struck down and then the princess becomes the prisoner, and it's really the heroic journey of the damsel in distress and how she fights against all these odds to ultimately be triumphant. So that's called The High Cost of Happily Ever After. There's a book called The Runner, which is about a guy who's been on the run from the Angel of Death since 1936. It's like a supernatural thriller. And, I don't know, best places to go to your comic shop and ask about my projects, or go on Amazon, find out, what I've written, and then go to your comic shop and buy them from your comic shop.
Jim, thank you again. When conventions
by the way, this is a big day. This is not my normal look. It's all going away tonight. I get to.
Oh, you're shaving your beard off tonight? I love it though. It's so epic.
Oh yeah, like it'll come back one day. I'm not, you know, I only want to look like Walt Simonson if I can draw like Walt Simonson.
Well, you know what? I find it a privilege because you came on the 50th episode of the show and we got a final look at that handsome beard. And
thank you very much. Yeah.
And again, thank you so much for coming on the show, my friend. I appreciate it. Do me a favor, hang out backstage real quick. I'm going to close out the show. I just, I want to have a few extra words with you. Yeah. Hang tight here. What a great episode. I'm telling you guys, legendary. Now, if you haven't yet, be sure you hit that subscribe button. It's right down there. And I'll be back tomorrow with another guest. Thank you all so much for tuning in. These episodes are always going to be up there. They're always going to be free for you because I love you guys and I love being out here. And I'm missing this convention scene. I can't wait to get back to Comic-Con and start, hawking new stuff. So I will see you guys tomorrow with a new episode. And until that time comes, onward to victory.